Conditions for Rohingya refugees continue to deteriorate. They face an untenable future in overcrowded Bangladesh, but it's still too unsafe to go home to Myanmar. I'm Femi Oke.
And I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream. Join us in our live YouTube chat or on Twitter.
I have covered war, I have covered violence throughout my career, but I have never heard of anything like that happening to human beings. The first time I arrived to the camps, it was unlike anything I've experienced before. It was pain and misery and trauma on a scale so large that it was almost unfathomable, even for somebody who was seeing it right in front of their eyes.
It's a place that isn't equipped to deal. It doesn't have the infrastructure, it doesn't have the sanitation, it doesn't have, all these sort of facilities that amount of people need.
Just a glimpse of what life is like for the 1.2 million Rohingya refugees currently living in Bangladesh. This month, things became even worse. Many migrants lost their only lifeline to the world, where the government blocked mobile phone access in their camps. The move was apparently for security reasons, but the Rohingya worry it's just another sign that they've outworn their welcome.
Overwhelmed by the refugee crisis, Bangladesh has tried and failed to send the Rohingya back to Myanmar twice in the past year. But refugees have refused, fearing renewed violence at home. Just last week, the United Nations warned that, quote, genocidal conditions, unquote, still remain in Myanmar and has urged the government to do more to improve conditions.
Lacking international pressure, the mostly Buddhist country of Myanmar has done little to welcome the Muslim Rohingya home. Meanwhile, Bangladesh is planning to relocate some refugees to a remote, flood-prone island in the next few months. And officials have made it quite clear that they can't play host much longer. So what will happen to the Rohingya people?
Well, joining us to discuss is Mohammed Jamjoom, senior correspondent for Al Jazeera English. He speaks to us from Doha, Qatar.
We also have Anita Shug. She is head of Women and Children's Affairs for the European Rohingya Council. Anita joins us from Osnabrück in Germany. And finally, Rone Sanluin. Naysan is the coordinator for campaign and media relations at the Free Rohingya Coalition, and he's currently in Frankfurt, Germany. We also invited several officials from Bangladesh and Myanmar to join the programme, but none of them were available. Guests, it is good to have you. Thank you for your time. I want to start here with a comment from Bangladesh's foreign minister. He says, "We are willing to send them anywhere, to anyone who wants to take them. We cannot afford to keep them for years," them being the Rohingya. Mohammed, you were reporting at the end of 2018 from Cox's Bazar, where so many of the Rohingya are they're there in refugee camps. Does this indicate a sense that Bangladesh is exhausted, it's tired, it has no more time for handling the Rohingya crisis and the refugee situation?
It certainly does, Femi, and we're starting to hear more of this type of rhetoric from Bangladeshi officials. Look, Bangladesh, it's a difficult situation for them because the country is really polarized when it comes to this issue. There are many people in Bangladesh that wholeheartedly support the Rohingya, and the country has been quite generous to Rohingya refugees. But there are also many in the country that do not support the refugees and would like to see them gone. So the fact that this rhetoric has been ratcheting up, it's been reported, at least in Bangladeshi media the last month or so, that there have actually been officials that have said that if the Rohingya don't want to leave, that they're going to actively make conditions more difficult for them in the camps, which is hard to imagine because, I've been to those camps 4 separate times and the conditions are appalling. I mean, they're much improved to where they were a few years ago, but they're still terrible conditions. So when you hear that, it certainly looks like the Bangladeshis are now really sort of running out of patience with the situation and trying to figure out what to do about it. The problem for them is that every time they go down the route of these repatriation schemes, they have to involve the UNHCR, the refugee agency. So whenever Bangladesh's government agrees with Myanmar's government that there is going to be repatriation of Rohingya back to Myanmar, well, the UNHCR, the refugee agency, has to then go and interview the people that are on the list possibly be repatriated. And every time the UN has done that, everybody that they've spoken with has said they do not want to go back. And can you blame them? The UN has repeatedly said the conditions are still not safe on the ground in Myanmar for any kind of return. The Rohingya will not be guaranteed any citizenship rights or freedom of movement. And just last week, as you mentioned a few moments ago, a UN fact-finding mission, independent investigators said that 600,000 Rohingya in Myanmar still live under the threat of genocide.
Okay.
So it's a very difficult situation for Bangladesh. It's a very, very difficult situation for the refugees in Bangladesh.
You mentioned, Mohammed, that it appears that the Bangladeshi government is running out of patience. I think that is something our audience would completely agree with. So we posited this to them, this headline that Bangladesh's prime minister has proposed relocating thousands of refugees to a remote island in the Bay of Bengal. Here's what Gordon had to say about that, a member of our community. It sounds like she is trying to get rid of them, the she being Sheikh Hasina. Why not integrate them into society? Anita, I'll give this one to you. The idea of trying to get rid of them, is that how you see this? Is this trying to make conditions so harsh for refugees that they want to leave?
First of all, I would like to mention to the public of Bangladesh, we are very grateful. All the Rohingya people are grateful for saving our lives. But the conditions what we are facing in the camps are also not worthy as dignified lives. We want to return home, but you have to help us. Relocating us from one camp to Bhasan Char Island is not part of the durable solution. Pushing us back towards Myanmar, to the very hands of the perpetrators who committed genocide against our community is not part of the durable solution. That's why the international community, what it has to do, it cannot just simply carry on saying dignified, voluntary, and safe return for the Rohingyas. It has to act upon. It has to pressure the government of Myanmar to create such conditions. Also, Bangladesh government cannot simply restrict our movements, take away our lifelines like the mobile phones, but instead of that, it has to refer Myanmar to the International Criminal Code or bring the perpetrators of genocide to ICC. This is what Bangladesh government can do. That is part of the durable solution. Fight for our rights, that we get our rights back in Myanmar as full citizens. We are anytime ready to return.
Naysan, I hear that. I want to show our audience what Anita means by this idea of dropping some of the refugees off at another location. Have a look here on my laptop. I know you already know this, but for the benefit of our viewers. This is Cox's Bazar, where 1.2 million refugees are. This is Bhasan Char that Anita mentioned, and Malika also brought up, this tiny little island here. The idea is that the refugees are relocated. I understand they're not going to be forced to move there, but this is what the accommodation will look like when they get there. And the options are, because there is a lake, that they can fish, but that's about it. Naysan, when you heard about that as a plan, as a way to address the situation in Cox's Bazar, what do you make of that? It's happening.
Yeah, the Bangladesh foreign minister had the interview with Deutsche Welle, German media recently. He said that, they are going to force the 100,000 refugees to the Bhasan Char. But before that, they said, they are not going to force anyone. But now they have made clear that they are going to force 100,000 to this island.
Really?
This island, they said,
Naysan, how can they do that? How can they force them?
Because we have no alternative option. We have only they give us their land. They are hosting us, so they are trying to do what they want, but without our consent. And they are saying that we will have the livelihood there, that the people can fish. And, like I live in Germany, I have visited the many concentration camp here, the memorial places, with the watchtower and the fence, it looked like the concentration camp. And also there is no guarantee that, this island, when it will be disappear from there, So it is like a dead that islands, no guarantee of the life of this 100,000 who will be forcibly relocated there. So this, I would call it, it is a killing field, another killing field. We escaped from the killing field from Myanmar. Now we are again going to face another killing field in Bangladesh.
Femi, can I also just add,
please,
to
Mohammed,
Nason, his point about Bhasan Char, because I keep in touch with many of the refugees who I've interviewed in Cox's Bazar, and they are so scared about the prospect of potentially being forced to go to this island. And we must put that into some kind of context here too, because this is a population that's considered to be the most, or one of the most persecuted minorities in the world. When they were living in Myanmar, they were marginalized to the extreme. They were persecuted for decades. They didn't have freedom of movement. Now the ones that are in Bangladesh, they can't move around freely. They're essentially trapped in these camps in these very poor conditions. And now they may be even further marginalized if it does happen, if it does occur that they are forced to go, however many of them, whether it be 100,000 or 200,000 to this island. And it's not just that they wouldn't have freedom of movement on that island. You have rights groups that have said repeatedly they are concerned that these could be prison-like conditions. They are concerned about the weather and the effect that it would have on this island, which is made out of silt off the Bay of, in the Bay of Bengal, which is prone to flooding, as you mentioned before. They're saying that one of the most vulnerable populations in the world could become a lot more vulnerable if they are forced to go to this island.
Part of the reasons that we have this issue is because of political will and how much has Myanmar done so far. Something that you drew our attention to, Mohammed. Have a look back here. As you mentioned on Instagram that there was a brand new report from the United Nations, and that report was talking about the potential for there being genocide of the Rohingya people. Let me let you listen to the UN Rapporteur for Human Rights in Myanmar. This is what she said just recently. Have a listen.
Myanmar has done nothing to dismantle the system of violence and persecution, and the Rohingya who remain in Rakhine live in the same dire circumstances that they did prior to the events of August 2017. They are denied citizenship and recognition, face regular violence, including in the context of the ongoing conflict between the Arakan army and the Tamadol, are unable to move freely, and have little access to food, healthcare, and education, livelihoods, and services.
So, Anita, these are some of the main reasons that the Rohingya, they don't want to go back home. They don't feel that they will be safe back home. Can you explain a few more reasons as to what the situation might be back at home for them and why they would prefer to be in Cox's Bazar?
Let us not forget one fact. Since 2012, the international media does not have any access to the Rakhine state. The international humanitarian agencies don't have unfettered access to the Rakhine state. And also the UN fact-finding mission has been denied access to it, including the special rapporteur. So how are we expecting these 740,000 Rohingyas to repatriate to a completely locked down area? Once we are going to push these people to this side of the Myanmar, then we are completely losing these people from the humanitarian radar. We are completely losing these people. So that's why there is no accountability. Who can provide us security? Who is willing to provide us security? We are not protected by law. That's why it's very important that first our rights are restored before we talk about repatriation. And also, you cannot decide on the fate of the victims and survivors of genocide when their voices are not included in any part of the repatriation process. So Rohingyas' voices must be heard. They must be part of any negotiations. And then the repatriation can be successful.
And on that point, I want to bring I want to bring in a few more Rohingya voices from online, picking up on the point that Anita was making. This is Faisal on Twitter, who says, "No more genocide. We want justice. We want to go back to our homeland. We want the military held accountable for alleged killing, looting, and rape. We want our rights back." So that's one person. The other comes to us via a video comment that she sent us. She's a Rohingya human rights activist, and here's what she told the stream.
so important that when we look at the Rohingya issues, that we look beyond the humanitarian crisis that there is. Yes, Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh are still in very, very dire conditions. They're still facing fear and intimidation in order to force them back into Burma. The situation in Burma has not improved either since 2017. This is confirmed by the UN fact-finding mission report. And other reports that had come out and confirmed satellite images of newly built military bases around Rohingya villages, as well as the Rakhine state, as well as the newly built internment camps. The military and the government of Burma have no intentions to actually make the situation better or, create any sort of reparations for not just Rohingya, but also the ethnic minorities.
So Naysan, I'll give that to you. I know you wanted to jump in, but if you could also address her point there that Myanmar is not making it very welcoming for people to come back. And of course, she calls it Burma because it's formerly known as Burma in that video comment.
Yeah. So if Myanmar government and the military want to bring back these more than 1 million Rohingya genocide survivors from Cox's Bazar to Rakhine state, first of all, they need to resettle the 130 Rohingya refugees who are trapped inside the concentration camp for more than 7 years. Since 2012, after the violence, they were dragged into the concentration camp and still they are there. So if they really want to repatriate the people from Bangladesh, first let them settle back in their original villages in Situi or elsewhere in the central Rakhine state and restore their citizenship. That will build a confidence among the Rohingya refugee in Bangladesh. Then they have to provide the international protection. It is necessary, because there is no guarantee that these people will not be persecuted again, and the criminal must be brought to the justice because of the impunity they have been continuously committing the crime against the Rohingya. Not only the Rohingya, but across the country, there are many other ethnic minorities. They are also suffering, but they are recognized as a citizen. They are recognized as an ethnic group. That is the difference between the Rohingya and those other ethnic minorities. So the most important is first is the justice, and then international protection. Then the full citizenship has to be restored.
Naysan, I hear this. This feels like, bearing in mind where we are 2 years after the beginning of the Rohingya crisis, this feels like this is not even remotely possible. Anita, go ahead.
I just wanted to add 2 points to the repatriation process. If Myanmar government is not allowing our identity to be accepted inside Myanmar, we are not protected, we are not safe. And also, Myanmar government should abolish, with the international community who are supporting this national verification card system. This is a genocidal tool where we are forced to write our ethnicity as Bengalis. It means denying our own identity. These are also very important when talks about repatriation are discussed.
All right, I want to bring in a little clip, and this is Rashid Amin, and on the actual anniversary of the beginning of the Rohingya crisis, when they had to leave Myanmar and then go to Bangladesh. He was talking about what is it that he and his fellow refugees want. Very clear demands. Have a look, have a listen.
We shall go back on 4 conditions. They are: 1, we have to be given citizenship. 2, Rohingyas remaining in Myanmar have to be shown to us. 3, UN peacekeeping force has to be there to protect us. 4, we have to be given justice for the crimes committed. We shall go if the International Criminal Court can do justice.
Mohammed, I've been listening very clearly and carefully to what Anita and Naysan have been saying, but it doesn't even look like we're even close to getting a resolution. What do your instincts tell you?
I would say you're absolutely right. I mean, it's unfortunate, but that just seems to be the reality on several fronts. I mean, one of the major problems is that, and this is a point that Anita touched on, is that you have governments that are speaking to one another about the Rohingya issue. Time and again, they are not talking to the Rohingya. They do not have a seat at the table when it comes to their future, and also what has happened to them in the past. So this is something that's very frustrating. This is not a great demand. This is just simply asking to have a seat at the table when it comes to trying to determine what their future might be. But it's much more complicated than that. I mean, we've touched a few times during the program today about, let's just say, the International Criminal Court. I mean, every time that I have gone to Cox's Bazar and spoken to the refugees there, the survivors, they have said that they want to see the International Criminal Court get involved in this, and they would like the International Criminal Court to mete out justice to those officials in Myanmar who they say are responsible for the genocide. And you know, that is a process that is riddled with bureaucracy and complications. And just to give you a little example, you know, in the past few months, you had the prosecutor for the International Criminal Court officially ask the judges for permission to launch an investigation, and still a decision has not been made. But even if a decision is made, the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction when it comes to this is not in Myanmar, because Myanmar is not a signatory to the Rome Statutes. It's not a member of the court. They would have jurisdiction because Bangladesh is a signatory to the Rome Statutes. So what they would be investigating, at least in the initial phases of any kind of official investigation, would be forced deportation across the border into Bangladesh. So that just gives you some example of how difficult this process is. So even if we get to a point where the ICC says, yes, we are investigating this, they have to figure out the scope of the crime they're investigating. They have to figure out where they're going to do the investigation. And we're talking something that could take years, could potentially even take decades, and really has no impact right now on the ground for those Rohingya refugees who are so desperate, and the Rohingya who are in Myanmar.
Mohammed, what you're saying there, of course, is so dire and so important that it makes the idea of a mobile phone and communication blackout seem smaller in juxtaposition, but of course it is at the very heart of being able to hear those voices. So I pull up this tweet that we just got from Protect the Rohingya, that's their handle, and they write, when a democratic state blocks the mobile phone and internet communication of an oppressed people or refugees, there is a problem. So Anita, we got a video comment from someone, an anthropologist who actually is studying the Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh, and he links the telecommunications blackout that is occurring right now to the future of the Rohingya. Have a listen to what he told us.
Recently toughened restrictions on access to mobile phone networks and phones affecting Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh are characteristic of that country's government's reactive stance in this crisis and on the issue of repatriation in particular. What's needed, rather, are proactive policies, including expanding third country resettlement, as Myanmar today, under Aung San Suu Kyi's leadership, remains a racist apartheid state where civil and political rights, including citizenship, are linked to race. Any repatriation under those conditions is tantamount to refoulement and would directly implicate the government of Bangladesh in Myanmar's genocide of the Rohingya.
So Anita, he mentions refoulement, the international law term in which a country would put refugees back in harm's way by sending them back to where they know they will be harmed. What do you make of his comment?
He's right in many ways, but one point I would like to see the international community in a different way. All the Rohingya population are very vulnerable. They are very traumatized. So if Bangladesh allows for resettlement, so all will qualify. But this is not our aim. We don't want to resettle in third world countries. We want to return home. So the international community, including the government of Myanmar, should pressure the Myanmar government to create conditions which are safe for us to restore our citizenship rights. This is what we are longing for. We don't want to go to any part of other countries. Myanmar is our home. We are not stateless. We have a state. Just help us create those conditions that we can return home.
There's something that I want to share with you, because in all of this conversation, we're talking about some solutions that Anita and Naysan have been talking about. Mohammed, from his perspective as a journalist covering this story for the last 2 years. I want to show you something here on my laptop, which is something that we haven't referenced, and these are the young people who are caught up in this. Often when there's a conflict or a crisis situation, young people don't get to go to school, they don't have education, so there's going to be a whole generation of Rohingya who are not educated, who haven't had access to school, and this is a problem that we are not even factoring into our conversation. So do have a look at Mohammed's Instagram, and then you can also look at some of the young people who are also very severely impacted by the Rohingya crisis that is currently happening in Myanmar, and also Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you to Mohammed, to Anita, to Nasan, and thank you for watching. See you next time.